Hey everyone, thanks for joining me in session 220 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. In this show, we're joined by Drs. Jason Vladescu, Lauren Schnell, and Jessica Day-Watkins. We talk about their research in training parents and caregivers on safe sleeping habits for infants. As you'll learn, there are sleeping practices that are recommended by pediatric groups that reduce the likelihood of sudden unexpected deaths in general and accidental suffocation and strangulation in bed incidents more specifically. If those are new terms to you, don't worry, we get into what they mean, how frequently they occur, and lots more. And while this may seem like a sad or morbid topic, and I've known people who've had children who've succumbed to these terrible tragedies, you can also look at this as a story of hope in that studies like these will lead to a wider adoption of sleeping practices that, over time, should reduce unnecessary infant deaths. Jason is a professor in the Applied Behavior Analysis Department at Caldwell University. Lauren is an assistant professor at Hunter College, and Jessica is an assistant professor at the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute. And together they worked on several projects in the area of infant safe sleeping, which culminated in some publications in JABA, which we discussed in this podcast, and I've linked them in the show notes of this episode as well. What I found fascinating about this topic is that it allowed us to discuss a wider range of issues that, you could look at it that they transcend safe sleeping practices. And these include things like staff training, cultural humility, public health and policy, contingency management, video modeling, dissemination, the list goes on. So there's really an angle here for everyone. So even if you're not interested in this particular topic, I think there really is something that you'll get out of this podcast. So I really hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. And we are brought to you today by How to ABA. At How to ABA, their goal is to make you feel supported and confident while helping your clients make real progress. In their membership community, you'll find all the assessments, programs, data sheets, and materials you need so that your job is just a little bit easier. As a member, you'll also be invited each month to join a live CEU and a live mentorship session in their private community group. You'll also have access to their extensive CEU library of recorded on-demand CEUs on relevant practical topics to BCBAs in the field. Go to howtoaba.com/join to learn more. And when you join today, use the code BOP to receive 10% off your yearly subscription. We're also brought to you by HRIC Recruiting. You've known about Barb Voss for years. If you've been listening to this podcast at all, she's been placing BCBAs in permanent positions for a long, long time. There's nobody who knows the job aspects of this field better than Barb. And as a matter of fact, I was visiting some friends at Keen Perspectives in White River Junction, and I met one of the analysts that she placed there, and talking both to the clinical owners and the BCBA Jen. They were both very pleased with the process on both sides of the table. So there's your little corroboration that these partnerships really do work. And so if you are looking for a job, if you're moving, you're about to graduate, if you or are a clinical owner and you're short-staffed like everyone else is, give Barb a call. Go to the show notes of this episode. Click on the link to schedule a confidential conversation with Barb right away. And last but not least, if you're looking for some continuing education, just go to behavioralobservations.com and click on the Get CEUs tab. I've got a variety of options for you, and I'm going to be adding some new ones very soon, so I think there's something there for everyone. So again, if you want to learn while you're driving around, if you want to learn while you're walking the dog, at the gym, whatever, just go to behavioralobservations.com/get CEUs to learn more. All right, that's it for opening remarks. So let's get to this fun conversation about infant safe sleeping practices.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
All right, I got a round table of experts here on the general topic of infant safe sleeping. So I'm joined by Drs. Lauren Schnell, Jason Vladescu, and Jessica Day-Watkins. How's everyone doing today?
Doing well, Matt. Thanks for having us.
Oh, I'm looking forward to getting into this. This is, as we were talking before I hit the record button, I'm always interested in applications of behavior analysis that are unique and novel and are kind of under the dome, if you will, that are applicable to large swaths of humanity. And that is not an understatement in this case, because we're talking about infant safe sleeping, and you guys were kind enough to forward me a couple of different papers that you and your colleagues have written on the topic. My youngest is 14, so it's been a while since I've been had to deal with putting infants down for naps and bedtime and things like that. So a lot of this will perhaps be going down memory lane for me. But I also know that this probably strikes at a pretty large demographic within our field, because I'm as I like to joke around, I'm a bit older than the average BCBA, and so there's lots of folks who are dealing with this right now, and again, more importantly, as I mentioned, beyond our little corner of the world, this is something that anyone who has kids has to contend with. So I am just so looking forward to getting into this. So let's start out with I guess my general question here is what made you guys want to take up this as a research topic? What made you want to study this topic first? And then we'll get into what it is and the details and things like that. But I'm always curious about people's motivations as to why they do what they do. So let's start with that.
Sure, Matt. I'll jump in here if that's okay, and kick us off. So I mean, the long story short here is that I first got interested in this area. I was working with one of my former PhD students. Her name is Jacqueline Mary, and she was always interested in doing work with infants. And a lot of her previous work had centered around, early infant social skills and language development. And I was like, Jackie, listen, I don't have an infant lab, and I don't have access to a lot of infants to do that kind of work. But I kind of had stumbled across this area of sleep-related deaths, and we started to dive deeper into it. And we kind of just thought that, as we can get into in a little bit more detail, that a lot of issues related to infant sleep-related deaths have to do with human behavior, and how humans and parents and caregivers arrange the infant sleep environment, and then kind of taking a little bit deeper of a dive. What we kind of identified is that a lot of the early work that has been done outside of behavior analysis, so in the fields of medicine and public health, have a long history of interest in this topic. And really how they've gone about tackling this is through educational programs and other didactic kinds of efforts. And even though that there has been a substantial decrease in sleep-related deaths for infants, that it's still a prevalent enough problem. So we decided to put together kind of a behavior analytic approach to addressing this problem. Things have taken off in the last 4 or 5 years since then.
I see. So before we get too far down into the specifics of the research program that you guys have been pursuing, let's get the audience up to speed in terms of the general issue. There's a number of acronyms, a number of terms, like SUID, SIDs, ASSB, things like that. So catch us up in terms of what the nomenclature is to this area. And also if you have information about, what the prevalence of these incidents are, if you can just give us kind of a scope of the problem type of overview, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in on this. So sleep-related infant deaths are actually the leading cause of post-neonatal mortality in the U.S. And a lot of work has been done in identifying the biological factors that may lead to these deaths. So, for example, cardiac abnormalities, exposure to drugs and alcohol in the womb, and environmental arrangements, which may or may not be present, that increase the likelihood of SUIDs. So specifically, I know there are a lot of acronyms here. So SUIDs, sudden unexpected infant death, is really the umbrella term that's used to describe any sudden or unexpected death, whether that's explained or unexplained, occurring during infancy. And this term, SUIDs, includes, under that umbrella, includes SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And SIDS is death in infancy without a known cause. And accidental suffocation and strangulation, ASSB, occurs when an infant is choking or strangled by items that could be in the crib, therefore leading to death. And in fact, in the US alone, approximately 3,500 infants die of sleep-related deaths, with non-Hispanic Black infants actually a little over 2 times more likely to encounter these deaths than their white counterparts. So we have identified risk factors that are present. So I named a few of them, but parents always ask us when we're working with them, how can I prevent this? And there are a list of 19 or 20 suggestions that the American Academy of Pediatrics provides us. Some of those variables are difficult to control, being born premature, for example, or being born with structural abnormalities in the heart or the lungs, age, race, exposure to secondhand smoke, exposure to drugs and alcohol. And then lastly, these environmental arrangements that we keep referring to, such as infants being placed on their stomachs to sleep, infants being placed on a soft bed surface, or with items in the crib, all increase the likelihood of sudden infant death. So although, as Jason was saying, this topic has been addressed in the medical fields, we really looked at these environmental arrangements, right? The role that human behavior plays, and decided to tackle the variables that we can control.
Are you looking for a new job, but you're overwhelmed with all the emails that you're getting from various ABA agencies? What if there was someone who was in your corner and could help you find the perfect job placement? Well, that person exists. Barbara Voss has been working as a recruiter for over 30 years, and her company, HRIC, specializes in placing BCBAs in permanent full-time positions throughout the United States. Barbara has been placing BCBAs since 2011, so she knows our business, and she offers personalized service to any BCBA looking for a new position. She also helps companies looking to hire BCBAs too. Here are just some of the things Barbara can help you with. She can provide information about salary ranges in different markets across the country. She can help you write your resume. She can coordinate and prepare you for the interview process, and even help negotiate the right salary for you. And best of all, there are no charges to any candidate for all of these services. When you're ready to make a change and want to work with someone who will listen to you and understand what you need in a new position, contact Barbara at HRIC. To schedule a confidential discussion, head over to hricolorado.com. Again, that's hricolorado.com, and hit the contact button to connect with Barbara. You won't be disappointed.
That's where we were able to apply our behavior analytic lens to operationally define what is a safe sleep area by taking some of those components of the 19 recommendations from the AAP, specifically, as Lauren started to outline, the sleep surface, objects in the crib, and position. And so we were able to create this operational definition that would be amenable to direct observation if we were to apply some of our methods of measurement and training. And that's where, again, like coming back to Jason's work with Jackie, where that initial work was first evaluated.
I see. So I want to get to those things that we can control, the environmental arrangements, but I guess a couple of more background questions about the general topic. So did you say there was 3,500 deaths a year approximately? Is that the number? And is that are those deaths attributed to the I guess suboptimal environmental arrangements alone, or is that the whole umbrella term of SUIDs, if you will?
Yeah, it's the whole environmental term, right? And what makes this topic so tricky and scary for parents is that SIDS deaths specifically, although investigated, are difficult to determine cause, right? Mm. So could it be items in the crib, or could it be exposure to secondhand smoke, or could it be neither? And we're just not sure. And that's what really makes this, I think, a crisis, right? A public health crisis if you have infants dying and you aren't sure why.
So if I understand you correctly, it's difficult to parse or diagnose and again, we're just going to be sensitive here. We're talking about this very traumatic and difficult topic of infant deaths, but it's difficult to parse a sudden infant death as to whether or not it's a biological or SIDS that would fall under SIDS or something that's environmental. So that 3,500, that number of 3,500 infant deaths is kind of like hard to sort out. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, and I would add too that obviously this is a little beyond our scope of work, but the American Academy of Pediatrics, and as well as a number of other organizations, are deeply involved in making or working on this issue. And one of the issues has to do with there's differences across states and across practitioners in terms of death scene investigations and autopsy practices. So what they're working on is some standardization, right? So that they can more clearly begin to identify etiology of some of these deaths, and to kind of get everybody kind of playing on the same field and using the same practices. So there is, so if you were to look at data across time in terms of these sleep-related deaths, what you will see is that over time there has been decreases in these deaths. And some of these have to do with some policies, things that have happened in the United States. But there also appears to be some diagnostic shifts happening as there's more standardization in death scene investigation and autopsy practices. But yeah, that kind of 3,500 sleep-related deaths is a kind of a catch-all for SUID. And more specifically, though, I'd say if you looked at specific causes, as it is for the most current data, SIDS, then unknown or unexplained causes, and then accidental suffocation and strangulation would be the second, third, and fourth most common causes of overall infant mortality, respectively. Yep.
Got it. Wow, what a complicated issue for sure. And again, just underscores my, I guess, admiration for you guys for trying to tackle something that is inherently, where the data sound like to me that the data are inherently messy. If you think about all these different communities across the, at least within the context of the United States, and how things are categorized and so forth. So let's talk about what are the, I guess, current best practices as you've learned in terms of how to prevent sudden infant deaths?
Sure. Go ahead, Jesse. Did I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say, so, predominantly the prevention strategy lies around education, right? Education and training that's delivered in the hospital to caregivers right after they've gone through labor and delivery, right? So many states have laws about delivering information to the caregiver while in the hospital before discharge around the ABCs of sleep. So for many of your listeners who have had children or have just been generally exposed to this information, the ABCs are alone, on the back, and in a crib. But, we understand, right, that didactic training alone, right, dissemination of the educational information, explanations to parents in the hospital when they're already probably sleep deprived, exhausted from labor and delivery, and being inundated by information may not be the optimal conditions to acquire this information, right? And then,
that is a cosmic understatement. I would just
Yes.
my last child was born at 4 a.m. after, and I could tell you that was not the ideal time for any party involved. First of all, my wife's to receive information. Fortunately, our other children were born at times that were a little different than that. So,
right, and at the same time too, going back to this point, right, of this didactic trainings, presentation of information alone doesn't necessarily translate to a change in performance. So again, Jason referred to this, a general decrease in overall rates of SUIDs, but at the same time, really some unchanged rates in that ASSB category. So again, ASSB, the accidental suffocation or strangulation, if those causes of accidental suffocation and strangulation are those modifiable environmental factors, we have some suggestions for how we might target those environmental components with performance-based trainings, right? Where you actually arrange the environment, get feedback on your performance, and continue to practice until you meet a performance criterion, right? But this is not adopted in the extant literature in prevention of SUIDs. So this was a really novel approach to this problem.
In your general scholarship around this issue, have you found any, so like we had to, again, I try not to make this story about me, but obviously, have had kids. And what I remember especially with our first one, we went to a class prior to our first child being born. And we actually practiced a lot of these things. We had dolls that we swaddled and all that stuff. And how common is that? Were we just lucky? Is this by dint of our, being, having access to, middle class resources, etc. What do we? Because I know some of this training can occur prior to birth, and perhaps under circumstances we are not sleep deprived and haven't been in labor for God knows how long and so forth. What have you guys learned about that?
Yeah, I think there's there's numerous variables at play here, and getting access to quality prenatal care plays a really significant role in reducing SUIDs. So what you're sort of talking about is like childbirth education, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember doing that also. My son is 13. I remember doing that same thing. Practicing swaddling, practicing putting him in the crib. And then he was born and my motivation changed, right? I was sleep deprived. I was scared. My hormones were up and down. Did I say I was sleep deprived? Because very sleep deprived with a newborn, right? And all of a sudden, what I learned went out the window, right? Because I needed to address, my motivation to sleep was paramount. And that meant putting him in bed with me so he could nurse all night. And that's sort of a line that we're investigating now is, how does your motivation change after you actually have your baby? And then how does that influence your responding, your behavior? So I think that yes, you had great prenatal care, and part of that is luck. Part of that is because of the demographic under which you fall, right? As a white man in a middle class environment, we know the data show us you have access to better parenting resources, and part of that is learning under the conditions that are not going to be present when the baby is actually here. Right. So everything changes when the baby is here, including how you as the parent behave.
Being a behavior professional is hard, but at How to ABA, our goal is to make your job just a little easier. Hi, I'm Shira.
And I'm Shayna, and we're here to personally invite you to join over 3,000 ABA professionals in our behavior resource membership.
Inside the membership, you'll find all the assessments, programs, data sheets, and materials you need to teach children with autism so that they make real progress. We even include how-to videos for you.
As a member, you will be invited each month to attend a live CEU on a variety of meaningful topics that you can actually use, in addition to an extensive library of recorded on-demand CEUs that you can access anytime. We give you more than enough for recertification.
And when you're stuck, we have our private members-only community group that's not on Facebook. Whether you're a beginner or a long-time practitioner, you'll benefit from a supportive community behind you.
Imagine an all-in-one resource to save you time and help your clients. Imagine having support and getting your toughest questions answered. And imagine being a part of a collaborative private group of professionals to share ideas.
So go to howtoaba.com/join. And when you join today, use the code BOP. You'll receive 10% off a yearly subscription, which includes CEUs.
One thing you brought up, I hadn't planned on asking about it, and it didn't occur to me until you just brought it up. But I do recall hearing that you mentioned you're kind of. I forgive me if I misunderstood you, but it says that you referred to a little bit of co-sleeping, at least for the purposes of nursing. And, I know, a lot of mothers will do that for a period of time and then transfer the infant to a crib. But I'm also aware that that's kind of a Western European, North American cultural practice, whereas there's a lot of other cultures where the family bed is the norm. And that seems to go against some of these, best practices in terms of reducing SUIDs, ASSBs, etc. Have you guys encountered that in your work in this realm?
Yeah, and how we typically approach our training is, we try to adhere with what the American Academy of Pediatric recommends. And their recommendation is that infants sleep in their own crib and that co-sleeping is avoided. And this is a common issue that we encounter along with a couple other issues. And I think, our main goal, though, is to try to educate those individuals that we're working with and supporting about the recommendations, about the relevant data, and to try to give them a context from which they can then make decisions about parenting and caregiving. Because we are quite familiar with and appreciate the variety of factors that influence caregiver decisions. And it's a complex topic, and there's a constellation of variables that seem to influence caregiver behavior. So, for example, we work with caregivers who live in multi-generational homes, and that may influence child care practices, infant sleep practices. But where we try to kind of behave from is the perspective of recommendations from best practice recommendations based on best current available data and evidence from the American Academy of Pediatrics. I will just throw in there too that, co-sleeping is one of these issues, but even swaddling is another variable that we will encounter questions related to, and try to address in a culturally responsive manner. But that there is some difference in opinions about how to proceed with some of these issues and factors.
Got it. So let's, if there, I want to give you guys the opportunity to kind of give any other kind of overview type of framing of this problem. But if we've got a solid enough foundation, I'd like to transition to the actual studies that you guys have conducted. So let's perhaps start with that, unless there's something else that you want to add to the broader base that we've just established. So let's talk about that then. So you guys came up with a general training formulation, it sounds like, with a variety of behavioral strategies. So rather than me summarize what you guys did, I'd like you guys to tell me, kind of how you went about, developing these interventions, how you tested them, what you learned from it, and anything else that you think would be noteworthy.
Yeah, I'll start us off here, and then my colleagues here, I'm sure, can add some nice color commentary. So I had alluded to the fact that some of this work started in the context of some student-led work, which was particularly exciting for me. And as we were working on this project, our review of the literature, revealed that, kind of as we've said already a couple times today, that this is an area where medicine and public health and some other fields have already done a lot of work. And common strategies in that literature, includes like printed materials, educational sessions, incorporating prompts. For example, they'll attach like information cards to cribs, or they'll even put messages on like the infant clothing about like positioning of the infant. And so, a lot of very smart folks have evaluated a number of things or technologies to try to address this issue. And I think Jesse alluded to earlier, though, what we were observing or noticing in a lot of this work, though, is that participants in these studies weren't really being trained in a context where they had to arrange a completely safe sleep environment for their infants, nor did they have to continue that training until they demonstrated some predetermined mastery criterion. And this seemed problematic for us because it's the potential is there for any incorrect arrangement could increase the probability of a sleep-related death. So I just borrowed from, I was like, hey, maybe we just try behavioral skills training, right? So we have a lot of literature, behavior analytic literature, demonstrating, that's a pretty robust technology for training folks, and probably considered a gold standard in our field. And like Jesse alluded to, I think the aspects of that kind of lend itself to such robust outcomes is the performance and competency-based components, where the trainer and trainee kind of perform or provide opportunities for performance, and then that training continues until a mastery criterion is established. And so some of our original kind of proof of concept work here involved just conducting an individualized training with just college students, right? So this was kind of just like a convenient sample of participants. And really our goal here was just to evaluate whether it was effective, work out some kinks, and come up with a feasible and practical type of approach to then implementing this further with more relevant participants. But the original idea here was to do this training either probably during the pregnancy period. So this is like some front-end information training that caregivers would be given and participate in prior to having their baby. And then maybe, I don't know if, Lauren or Jesse kind of want to talk to how it expanded from there to some of our community partners.
Yeah, sure. I can pick up here. So, this is where the work picked up with those community health centers in Philadelphia. So I was able to tap into some of the just community relationships that existed amongst my colleagues here in Philadelphia. And we partnered up with an organization called Project Home, which is a large nonprofit organization in Philadelphia, whose mission is to break the cycle of homelessness and poverty through supports through housing, employment, medical care, and education, so Project Home. And Project Home offers prenatal education groups to women immediately in the community, most of whom are non-Hispanic Black, and otherwise are not accessing prenatal care. So we were connected with their prenatal group who had standing sessions around prenatal education, one of those topics of which was infant sleep. So we started off by, Lauren and I, we came together. We were invited to join the group. It's sort of like a group it's like a discussion group, essentially, led by the members, moderated by a nurse. And we just came and sat with the group. We weren't there on the sleep topic. We were actually there during breastfeeding. We just sat and listened. We didn't talk about safe sleep. We just learned about the group. We occasionally were invited to share our own personal experiences. We both have had children, so we shared our successes and struggles with breastfeeding. And then, we later, shared that we also had information about safe sleep. And if the group was interested, we could come back and provide more information and training. And so from there, we were invited to come and roll out this behavior skills training at the group at the community health center. So we were there with the Project Home partners that had established relationships with these patients. And we were really following their lead in terms of like, when is this training? When is it on your calendar? We will come when it's convenient. We had access to some monetary resources so that we could offer compensation for participating in the training. Folks were taking time out of their work schedule. They were arranging other childcare. It was taking time out of their day even to be there. And we wanted to provide some compensation for that. So that was a big draw. And we had that feedback from Project Home that these were some of the best attended trainings they had. And so we were really happy about that, that they were getting folks in the door. And so, we replicated the work that Jason and Jackie had done in that original proof of concept study with actual caregivers who were expecting babies, some of whom it was their first child, some had children already. But we conducted that baseline pre-test to confirm whether or not they needed the training. All did. They would have.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler, right? So maybe one of those three components of safe sleep, remember, surface, position, and objects, even if one of those was scored incorrect in the baseline, we wanted to train them because any one of those factors can result in a sleep-related death. And so we did baseline and post-test individually, but we did group behavior skills training for the modeling and the role play, right? And then, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to go back just about a minute ago. You mentioned something that I think perhaps bears some highlighting here. It sounds like you guys didn't go in there and say, "Hey guys, we have this awesome thing and we want to teach you up on it because we have these big brains and fancy letters after our names, and we're going to show you how it's done." I'm being facetious here, of course, but I'm just making some notes here. It's like you came in, you sat, you listened, and you only offered this after you've established some rapport and trust. I think that bears some highlighting for folks who are doing any type of outreach, whether it's on this topic or not. So I just wanted to underscore that. I have a question related to that also. Are there aspects of the training that you guys learned from that listening process that were there elements that you weren't aware that existed that you said, I'm going to put that into our training here because I just learned about this. I had no idea that X was an issue or something like that. I know I'm putting you guys on the spot here, but could talk about that process a little bit. Again, I just think this is a meta skill or a meta strategy that can transcend this particular topic.
Sure. So this is actually one of the things I'm most proud of with this work that we do, is how we really built our community partnerships. I could talk about this forever. We were very, very purposeful in doing this. So all of our research right now is conducted in Philadelphia. One of the very first things that we did do was met as a research team and identified that bringing in a cisgendered male, so bringing in Jason, into circles that were focused on women and mothering might introduce a barrier to establishing and maintaining partnerships. So right away, Jesse and I were the boots on the ground. We reached out to colleagues. Jesse told you a little bit about how she reached out to colleagues outside of behavior analysis to make introductions. And we shared our desire to address safe infant sleep. But as you said, we didn't go in there in, our lab coats and clipboards and pens and, insist they call us doctor. So we got our foot in the door, and then we joined the community health center. We attended circles, like Jesse said, on breastfeeding. We shared our experiences. We remained quiet a lot of the time and listened, to other mothers sharing their successes and struggles. We didn't make any requests. We didn't hand out IRB consent forms, nothing like that. We were there as participants, and we continue to make those connections by establishing or by sharing some of our own experiences. Actually, this was 4 or 5 years ago, but I remember, Jesse, I think you were pregnant with your youngest. And we talked about that, how hard it is being pregnant in the city, all of the demands that come up when the baby's born. And, once we developed that rapport, we were flexible in offering trainings. So the trainings were held as convenient for the mothers, and we were there. So if we had other research assistants, for example, who had to cancel last minute, Jesse and I stepped in so that we were really considered reliable partners, at Project Home and beyond. And as we sort of developed our training, we all took a deeper dive into the barriers of safe sleep. And we really looked at what is it that increases risk factors for non-Hispanic Black infants, because this is the population that we're working alongside. So we need to know more about that. And that's how you deliver, culturally sustaining intervention. And we read a lot about what those factors could be. So, for example, higher instances of multi-generational home structures. So perhaps a grandmother or great-grandmother who co-slept with their baby and is very influential in the mother's life. Higher instances of maybe believing that there's a higher power or religious, a religious entity that influences whether or not your baby is alive or is not alive, and therefore it's out of your hands. We really investigated these variables, and then we tweaked and changed our training to address them. So we were very upfront in saying, you may have heard from other members of your family that it is safe to co-sleep. We're going to tell you why it's not safe. Or you may, have heard, or people in your family, or you may believe that there's nothing that you can do. And this is, this is how fate sort of turns things around. But we're here to tell you these are the things that you can do. So we were very purposeful in addressing those cultural variables where we could. And we have made changes to our training throughout the past 4 and 5 years to make sure that we're consciously addressing all of these things.
Hey everyone, as a BCBA, meeting your continuing ed needs can be challenging at times. That's why I have made selected episodes of the Behavioral Observations podcast available for Type 2 continuing education credits. That's right. You can meet a portion of your professional development requirements on the go. Currently, we have CEs for topics including functional assessment, ethics, and supervision. Come learn from podcast favorites such as Greg Hanley, Pat Fryman, Mark Dixon, as well as many other amazing guests. For more information, head on over to behavioralobservations.com/getCEs.
Yeah, and just two more ways that we observed and what we heard from either the trainees themselves or our community partners. So, for example, we trained grandmothers. Those were some of our participants, right? So if you were living with grandma and she was going to be taking care of the baby and putting the baby to bed, she could come and be trained too. Ditto for dad, right? Or your other caregiver. We've trained those partners. We've trained those grandmothers. And another really, really useful piece of information from our community partners was one day we were sitting around and one of the leads at Project Home said, one of the reasons we see a lot of blanket use blankets, which that's a soft bedding, a loose object in the crib, which could block the airway, the baby could be entrapped around, is that a lot of folks do not have, they might not have heat all year, right? Their landlord shuts it off. They're not able to pay the bill. And now they don't have any heat in the home and they really want to keep the baby warm. So they use a blanket. So we heard that and said, you know what? There's something on the market called a wearable blanket, a sleep sack, right? And the AAP says it's okay and safe. So we started handing out wearable blankets at every one of the sessions. That was one of the incentives that we provided participants with. And so when we were in our instructions phase and we said, this loose blanket is unsafe. It's an unsafe object. It's unsafe to put under the baby. Instead, you can use this safe sleep sack and you're going to take it home today. This is for you, right? So those were a couple of ways that we learned, we kept learning as we progressed through this, series of trainings and then incorporated that feedback from the community directly into the training.
Yeah, and if I could,
go ahead, Jason.
And I was just going to add, I think Lauren and Jesse did a fantastic job talking about how we try to contextualize and iterate our training through the lens of kind of some of the social determinants of health. I was just going to add a little more in a different sense, in a broader sense, just about behavioral skills training. And Jesse was alluding to that, in our first work, that it was an individualized training, that we adopted it then to make it delivered, at least parts of it, in a group format. And I was just also going to mention, though, that something that we've been kind of picking up on is that I think we as behavior analysts kind of view behavioral skills training as, fairly straightforward, something practical that we get a lot of bang for our buck. But we haven't necessarily seen that same sentiment by folks outside of behavior analysis, that even though it's producing fairly robust outcomes, that folks in other fields and who are not behavior analysts really kind of view it or seem to view it as somewhat effortful, and that they may not be willing to kind of adopt that type of training approach in their practice. So that's something else that we've started to kind of wrestle with and tackle, that, in thinking about sustainability and scalability of kind of our work, that we're not sure behavioral skills training in its current form, how we've been applying it, will ever be potentially adopted and scaled for broad usage.
Where are you seeing these objections, just out of curiosity?
So some of it has been, and something we haven't talked about is, we've always collected a bunch of, maybe data that you could probably put under the umbrella of social validity. And so, for example, one thing that we did in some of our early work is we created these kind of video montages of what behavioral skills training looks like and sent these montages out to medical personnel. So say nurses who would be involved in doing this kind of training, say in a hospital setting. And we just kind of started asking, very specific questions to obtain their feedback, and as well as the degree to which they might be willing to kind of use such a practice. To summarize, not to go into like the nitty gritty here, but to kind of summarize broadly, it was fairly positive, the feedback, but the kind of a continued kind of sentiment was that seems effortful, right? Particularly, I think it's in relation to current practice, right? Where they're just handing out some information or doing some brief didactic types of trainings, it would entail a whole extra kind of additional responsibilities on their end. And so, that's something, hopefully that kind of answers your question, Matt, and kind of gives you a flavor of, some of the feedback that we've gotten.
I can imagine hospital staff in general have a lot of competing contingencies. And so when you're asking people to go through not just the 4 steps, but also iterate those 3rd and 4th steps until performance is correct, that seems like a heavy lift for sure, when compared to just, I'm going to tell you what to do, and then I have to move on to this next patient.
Yes.
Or what have. I'm just speaking in generalities here, but I'm just kind of imagining what the demands on nurses and other hospital staff might be. Have you considered tapping into the motivation for improved patient outcomes as a means of persuasion, if you will? I'm not trying to offer unsolicited advice. I'm just brainstorming here with you guys, extemporaneously, but because obviously people who go into this line of work, not to generalize, but obviously have a for the most part, I think we can assume that there's a huge patient care impulse or motivation, if you will. And if you stated that, we do this because it reduces risk. We do this because it improves lives, yada, yada, yada. I don't know if that would make a difference or not. Maybe you've already tried that. And again, this is more of a curiosity, not to say you should go do this. But
I would say too,
so I guess I'm speaking more towards like a motivational interviewing type of strategy, or, something along those lines.
I think, yes, definitely. I think, that there is a shared interest, right, in improving outcomes for patients. But what I would also say beyond, I don't necessarily think it's necessarily an individual kind of performer issue, because I think we've even worked with and encountered folks that might be willing to do it, but then they're working in environments and organizations that don't necessarily have systems or processes in place to support such work. And so this is creating, issues even just beyond some individual, say, nurse or practitioner for, say, even adopting something like this. So what we've started to do, and I mean, we can get into an hour later, is, looking at how we might adopt our training to make it more practical and feasible, right? So incorporating video modeling. And that's, maybe I'll kick it off to Laura now, because she was the lead on that project that is coming through the pipeline here.
Yeah, let's hear about it.
It is coming through the pipeline quickly, which is exciting. So people ask us all the time, right? Like, how can you scale up and get this out there to help more people? And at first, the obvious answer is get into the hospitals, right? Maternity units, labor and delivery. And we did approach a hospital. And just to echo what Jason said, there were a lot of organizational and environmental barriers that we just could not overcome right now. Finances and staffing and questions about treatment fidelity and supervision and motivation of the staff in the hospital. So we kind of came back together, and because we have these social validity data that demonstrate at times our participants really think that our training may be too long or may be too cumbersome, we started to investigate ways to make this shorter in duration, to maybe remove necessary trainers, to systematize our intervention. And we created a video model. We worked with a production company. And instead of delivering the didactic piece of behavior skills training in person, instead of interacting, with our participants during the modeling portion of BST, we used a video model that participants were able to watch on their own. We were in the vicinity, but they watched on the computer. It allowed for some active responding where they then would set up a crib or fix errors in a crib according to what they learned in the video. And then we would step in towards the end of that for, to collect our data and deliver feedback. And we did see that it decreased, durations of training time. We did get some favorable social validity data from that project. And we're looking at ways to even do more, right? Remove the trainer even more. So can they watch the video and go from start to finish and perhaps submit, pictures or videos of their performance to us, through text message or whatever it may be. How can we deliver this training in a way that makes it more acceptable to large organizations who come in contact with infants and newborns and new parents on a daily basis? That seems to be one of the next steps, right? I know we're going to talk about sort of our next steps in this line of research, but that is one of the next steps, right? How can we scale up and reach more parents, new parents?
Yeah, because in some of like the extant literature around SUIDs prevention, right? The grant funders are really interested in these scalable interventions, especially those of which that can reach a broader folks that might have geographical limitations in terms of coming to a training, right? So address some of the access to healthcare education. It would be really wonderful if we can get to a point where we have this video-based training that is substitutable for BST that can be offered remotely to parents, right? And that could be offered while they're sitting in the waiting room, waiting for their OB appointment. Or it could be something that's even conducted at the 6-week postpartum appointment, right, that the mom attends, wherever they might already be accessing healthcare, or from the comfort of their home, right, where they could access this video, send some permanent product samples of their performance, right, that could be, confirmed for accuracy. And that way we could reach a much broader audience with this intervention, rather than just anyone who can physically get to the community health centers. So, this is one avenue we're looking to see in terms of scale. And we really also feel that just to kind of segue into our follow-up work, in one of our latest papers, right, we adopted contingency management to work on the in-home portion of the training, right? So, taking you back to our basic training, the BST, right? Again, that's conducted prenatally, generally, right? We'll train anyone. Again, if someone comes in and they have their 3-week-old baby, we'll train you right now on safe sleep. But most of our parents are receiving the training prenatally, and they're working with mannequins, infant mannequins, in an analog setting, right? So we don't have much data on how that performance maintains over time or generalizes to an actual infant with all of those variables that we talked about in the beginning of this talk, right? Sleep deprivation, a fussy baby, right? Just this myriad of challenges in the real environment, right? In that home setting, in that naturalistic environment. So, we understood that the next step in this work was to look at the durability of behavior skills training over time into the home. And, most of what exists out there already in the larger literature are, checklists asking about the caregiver's adherence, let's say in the last 4 weeks, in the last week, or your intention to adhere when you're at home. And again, we're concerned about potentially, the parent may feel, motivated to report what they hope they will do, right? Because it implies that if I report, actually, I didn't put my baby down safely, you're reporting this unsafe behavior, which, that's who's going to be motivated to do that, right?
Right.
So there's just sort of implicitly some concern about maybe the accuracy of those reports. So again, we wanted to use some direct observation or some permanent product that we could score. And in our literature review, we had identified this one paper that used photographs. They compared photographs that were taken of the home sleep area, and then they compared them to a home visit direct observation. And they had favorable scores in that comparison that gave them confidence that the photos were somewhat reliable in terms of being able to score the safety of that home environment. So we took that idea of the photograph as a permanent product, and we designed this follow-up phase. So after the baby was born, we would reach back out to parents who had indicated some interest, and we said, okay, for 7 consecutive days, we'd like you to submit a photograph of your baby sleeping in your home safe sleep area. Okay, the photograph will be scored for position, objects, and surface, right? Our 3 components. And then from the contingency management literature, we designed this escalating pay scale, right, where incentives, in this case, monetary incentives, were delivered contingent upon a correct photo of the safe sleep area. And for every day that the parent submitted a photo that was correct, they earned more and more money. Because the idea here is that you earn more money for continued correct responding, right? And by the end of a full week of photos, they could earn up to $100. So I'll pause there. Maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the CM background, or if that would be helpful.
Yeah, we've done a couple of shows on contingency management, but if you want to give just a quick overview of it for those who might have missed those, I'm a big fan of contingency management. It's obviously been applied across a variety of settings. But for those who are unfamiliar with it, if you could tell us a little bit about it, that would be a good starting place.
Yeah, sure. So generally, contingency management arranges that an incentive, often monetary incentives, are delivered contingent upon a target behavior. And this comes largely from work within addiction treatment, right? So tons and tons of literature is out there around the success of using incentives contingent upon, let's say, a clean urine sample in the case of, drug treatment. Also around smoking cessation. Jesse Dallery's been on your show to talk a lot about that work, which, that's where we went, right, to learn about designing these contingency management interventions. And there have been a number of other applications of CM, right? So delivering incentives contingent upon adherence to treatments, vaccination, treatments for tuberculosis, increasing physical activity, etc. Right? So it's an intervention that's been demonstrated as successful across a variety of health-related behaviors, and also regardless of socioeconomic status, age, et cetera, it's really successful. So, we were really excited about merging the CM literature with this behavior skills training literature. Again, because, a lot of the CM work has been done in this public health domain, and we see safe infant sleep as sitting under that public health domain as well. So that's where the marriage of these two literatures came together.
It's funny. I've got a running list here of all, this is like a grab bag, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but of behavioral strategies. You've got BST, video modeling, the use of permanent products, contingency management. This is like an ABA playbook here. So it looks like you guys have just kind of taken out all the stops to address this issue. So it's just another area in which I think this line of work is not just commendable, but it's a really good example of the broad applicability of these principles beyond the stuff that most people do with them. So I just want to pause and kind of make that observation for a minute. So what was the outcome of this contingency management intervention based, how did your participants do with it? What did you learn from it? I'm sure there are other, do you have other iterations of this planned?
Yeah, I'll jump in here quickly I'll summarize kind of the outcome of our first couple applications. And I think one of the positives that we saw was that, as Jesse alluded to, what we arranged was a system wherein caregivers would text us pictures of their infant in the infant sleep environment. And we would provide positive feedback, corrective feedback as needed, and they would be earning incentives, and that was monetary in our case. And what we did find was when participants submitted photos, they were likely to depict a safe sleep environment. So I think like that would be probably, in one sentence, the good outcome that we observed. However, we did obtain some variability in the degree to which participants actually submitted photos. So participants didn't always submit photos. So kind of where we're turning now is modifying our contingency management procedures with an eye towards increasing that participation. So just getting more steady submission of photos. And one way we're looking at doing that is working with some behavioral economic folks to try to identify, we had selected our incentive amounts kind of just based on our resources available. So it's somewhat arbitrarily determined. So one thing we're going to be looking at is trying to kind of empirically derive those incentive amounts, and trying to get some data to suggest, how much would we basically have to pay you for you to do this and submit these photos on a regular basis, and use that as kind of a driving force or piece of information to kind of structure and update our contingency management approach. One other issue that I'll bring up too is that we were only having caregivers send one picture a day. That's what our ask was of them. But the reality is that infants sleep more than once per day, right? They're being put down to sleep more than once per day, right? So that's another issue that we haven't yet tackled, but it is on our agenda to work on and tackling that, right? So, trying to understand the degree to which does one, if we capture that one sleep, right, is that enough for us to be confident that the other sleeps would also correspond with what's happening during that one that we captured? Or are we going to need to do something involving multiple sleep periods each day? So obviously that starts to increase the complexity of trying to address this issue. And so trying to find a way to do this in a practical way. So I don't know if Jesse or Lauren, you had anything to add there.
And I'll just to piggyback a little bit, we're also really interested in how is responding changing as environmental variables change. So, for example, are you putting your newborn or your infant to sleep safely at 8 p.m., but at 3:30 a.m. After they've been up a few times and you have a meeting the next day, or you have an appointment, how is your responding going to change under that new set?
An insurance reauthorization is due.
Correct. Right. So it's like, how is your motivation influencing your responding? Right. We obviously we know that it is, but how and what can we do to encourage adherence to this protocol, no matter the time of day, no matter the location, no matter who is in your home, if grandma's there, if you're there alone, et cetera.
Yeah. And I would add, just to piggyback off Lauren there, that, we really like CM. And I think a lot of people probably really like CM because it's introducing a new contingency of reinforcement, because we're battling other contingencies, right? And so, for example, we didn't get into this, but, the recommended sleep position is supine, right? And so on their back. But babies are more likely to are less likely to spontaneously awake if they are put to sleep and prone or on their stomachs, right? So, caregivers that are awake in the middle of the night with their infant may discover this phenomenon and start putting their baby to sleep on their stomachs because they're going to be less likely to awake. So, we have to try to, it's like coming up with ways with dealing with those kind of more natural kind of reinforcement contingencies that are operating in the environment.
Seems like the amount of variations or variables that you guys could look into just seem endless.
Yeah.
So you've already talked about some of the things that you have in the works and on the horizon. Are there other future iterations of this that you guys plan on investigating that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, Jesse, I was maybe you, if you want to take the lead, talking about the work with the med students.
Oh yeah, right. So that's another one of the avenues that we were able to connect with, again, like our existing partnerships, right? So, I sit over at Drexel University, and we have a College of Medicine, so educating physicians. And the College of Medicine has a health practicum course. And we learned that primarily these students they're being placed in the community to do a practicum, and that they might be interested in learning about how to teach others infant safety. So we partnered with the College of Medicine after, again, sharing with them the work that we had been doing. They were really excited about this performance-based training, and that their students could be embedded in the community to disseminate it. So each year we take on 2 to 4 medical students, and they are trained. We use a pyramidal behavior skills training approach, right, where we train the trainer. We use BST to teach them how to deliver BST. So these first-year medical students, we obviously collected data on the success of this pyramidal approach, and you can find that in Java. We'll be sure to drop a link or a PDF for your listeners. And so once we had trained up these medical students, they were placed around the various community health centers that we have partnered with across the year. So once to twice a month, they're either at a project home or at a women's emergency shelter that we partner with. And they offer the training to whomever shows up that night or signs up. So this is a way that we're continuing to train anywhere from 2 to 6 additional caregivers in a month across the year. And we're also teaching these first-year medical students about these performance-based trainings. They're learning about infant safety. They've even said, so we always train them first in the basics of safe sleep, right? We make sure that they can set up the crib successfully and safely. And so they give us that anecdotal feedback that they've learned a little something that's, many of them are not parents yet, right? These are first-year medical students, so they might be 18 or 19 years old. So they might have had babysitting experience, but they haven't had to place their own child down. So we ensure that they know how to do that safely. And then, the second part is that they learn about these performance-based trainings and how to do them. So it's been a really exciting partnership. Again, bringing together the resources at the university and giving these med students a really meaningful health practicum applications experience.
Yeah, it's been great.
Go ahead. Sorry, Lauren.
It's been great, and we have gotten some great feedback from the medical students. So, this is I know I said I'm most excited about community partnerships. I'm also most excited about this, right? That we're making inroads with non-behavior analysts, right? And I'm sure we can all agree that that's what we need to be doing as BCBAs. So, collaborating with a medical school in training medical students just carries so much social validity. So it's just another avenue of addressing public health concerns.
right? Because these could potentially be the pediatricians, the OBGYNs of the future who are talking to their patients about the 19 recommendations by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And then they'll have this practical experience and this ability to talk about their own experience teaching others about safe sleep, or maybe they'll even adopt some of these performance-based trainings in their own practice, right? I mean, who knows what the future will hold for them, but we're really excited about, interacting with medical personnel, in their sort of like training infancy, right? And it's similar to working with undergrads, right? We've all talked about teaching undergrads. I've had that experience as well. I really like teaching undergrads because they're just so new, right? They're at the beginning of their adult education, and you can really have an impact on how they view psychology, for example, how they view special education when you give them this information about this, applied behavioral approach to changing human behavior and changing lives. So in that same way, that's how I feel about working with the first year medical students. We could really help set them on a path that could impact how they practice medicine in the future.
That's pretty lofty stuff there, but it's quite aspirational for sure. I'm wondering if I kind of want to just, I know we talked about this at the outset of the conversation, but I'm wondering if in your review of the nature of this issue, are there, for lack of a better word, again, pardon the morbidity, but like hot spots where sudden infant fatalities are more? I know we talked about it from a population standpoint, but I'm thinking like geographically, is it more likely to happen in I don't know, a certain region of the country or something like that? And I'm just trying to, I'm wondering if as you guys make this technology more portable, more virtually based, in the various ways that you've already discussed and things like that, if some of these procedures were put into place in an area that needs it the most, would that move the needle for those settings and locations where sudden infant deaths are most prevalent, and thereby, perhaps show a more direct cause and effect to perhaps influence the some of these large medical associations, more than they might be right now?
Sure.
I know that's a number of steps to that question. I apologize, but I hope you get the gist of it.
I will tackle maybe one of those steps in that multi-step question. I don't want to negate the intersectionality of this issue, right? So, sure. So I'm sure your audience won't be surprised to hear that lower socioeconomic urban environments tend to have an increase in SUIDs. And it's a whole other episode to talk about why that is, right?
Sure.
Funding and prenatal care and race and access to education and medical resources. So just like all other areas of public health and education, this topic is also influenced by, societal structure, socioeconomic class and race and poverty. We so far have only done our work inside of Philadelphia, which does have some of the highest rates of SUIDs in the country. I live in New York City, so we've talked a lot about carrying this training up the turnpike into New York City, and looking at some other urban areas where we can develop some community partnerships, because we know that is where these pockets of higher numbers lie. Okay.
Very good. Very good. I appreciate you elaborating on that. Are there other, I know you guys already talked about different aspects of scaling and things like that. Are there other Well, let me ask you this: like, where do you, where do you want to see the adoption of where can we realistically see the adoption of some of these training practices over time? Because it just sounds like almost a no-brainer, but at the same time, you have these barriers that we also discussed in terms of the competing contingencies of hospital staff and so forth. The emerging work on what the optimal reimbursement rate from contingency management might be and things like that. So again, the variables are infinite, it seems like, but more generally here, as we kind of like broaden out the discussion, as we kind of conclude our chat here, where do you beyond what we've already discussed, where would you like to see this?
Yeah, I'll throw something in here, and it maybe not a direct answer, but I think that will lead to a conversation that kind of gets you thinking, or gets our viewpoint about kind of how we're trying to think about this. Interestingly, we've been actively trying to, we're actively applying for and trying to obtain grant funding to support some of this work. And interestingly, some of the feedback that we've gotten has been, what are these autism researchers doing studying safe infant sleep? And which is, I think, a fair question. And so I think, they're getting at, why are these behavior analysts dealing with this area, and how is that relevant? And I think where that's led us has been to reach out and approach some established safe infant sleep researchers. So these are folks operating in medicine and public health. They are not behavior analysts at all. To kind of let them know about some of the work that we're doing, but also, to ask if they were interested in partnering with us and collaborating with us. So we have started, I don't know if that's maybe the best term, started to collaborate with one individual. And maybe I'll kick this off to Jesse, who can maybe talk about, kind of what that may open the door for based on what this individual already does in terms of this kind of work.
Yeah, so this has been a baptism by fire, the world of applying for grants, right? None of us were trained in how to apply for grants, right, as a part of our educational training. Up to this point, we've done research with the resources of graduate students and so forth, but there's a whole other world of researchers that rely on grant funding and have really honed these skills for how to write grant applications and so forth. So we've been learning, from mentors that we have who have gone through this, grant writing process, how to translate the kind of writing that we do about behavior skills training, for example, or how we measure things, right? Or how we assess social validity, and working towards putting that into these grant applications so that we can clearly explain the value of direct observation, the innovation of bringing this approach to training, incorporating procedures like contingency management and so forth, right? So we've been working for about 2 years now on writing letters of intent, writing research strategies, learning the ins and outs of NIH, right? So it's been, we're still learning. And one of, like Jason said, we've learned that it's really important to build a team. I mean, that's certainly something we've learned just working together as a small group. But the grant funders want us to make that team bigger and to recruit folks with expertise. So that means folks who have expertise running randomized controlled trials, because that is the convention for these larger dissemination studies. Folks who have been doing safe infant sleep prevention, but at another scale, right? So we are sort of working, again, towards understanding, how can we communicate more effectively? And I mean, again, to kind of bring that back to the, like, something that we might not have touched as much on in this talk, but how can we broaden the reach of behavior analysis by the way we communicate, right? Whether it's to lay folks or it's folks outside of our field. We've really been pushed to think about how we can communicate to these grant funders about behavior analysis and that take on this issue of public health. So we're going to keep at it. You know, we are lifelong learners here. We're going to learn how to get those grants, and that's going to facilitate this larger dissemination of the work that we're doing. And just like another pivot in terms of like broadening this conversation, again, like the AAP has 19 recommendations around safe sleep. We've incorporated 3. There's lots more work to be done, and we're investigating, interventions to teach tummy time, or, sort of off the list of the 19 recommendations. If you find an infant that is unresponsive in the crib, you should administer safe CPR as soon as you've called 911. So can we train our families to administer CPR? So these are some of the additional avenues that we're pursuing parallel to safe infant sleep that we're really excited about. And we would encourage anybody that has been inspired by this talk, right? I know it has been lofty and aspirational, but we are really passionate about this avenue to mainstream behavior analysis. So if you feel the call, take a look at those 19 recommendations. Take your behavior analytic lens to how you could operationally define and identify a training approach to teach folks to adhere to any of those other steps, identified by the AAP.
So in the I don't know if you guys caught the last Inside Java podcast that we did with Derek Reed and Brett Gelino and others. We talked about the University of Kansas tobacco-free policy that they kind of bench tested and evaluated. And one of the comments, or one of the questions I asked for them, I said, it's kind of ironic because it was on the Inside Java series, but I said, why is this in Java? It was kind of the paraphrase of my question. And you've published some of these the studies you share with me, I believe, are all in Java, if I'm not mistaken. Do you have ideas or goals of publishing in other outlets where it would catch the attention of some of these non-behavior analytic constituencies that you're trying to reach? And then I have a kind of a follow-up question about effect sizes and things like that was part of Derek's answer. So I'll let you guys take that any direction you want.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is, of course, yes. That is something that, again, aspirational for us at this moment. But, I think as we're starting to think about and design studies employing designs other than single case experimental designs, and that's pretty much what we've employed, given our resources and what's practical now. But I think as we start to think about how, we're going to, further connect with these folks, or the individuals and organizations that are already tackling and addressing this issue is, I think our plan would be, we're looking to conduct a randomized controlled trial. And interestingly, you mentioned effect sizes, that in all of our publications, we actually do include and calculate effect sizes. And that's actually been super helpful from the perspective of trying to plan some of these future bigger projects, because, that's allowing us or lending itself to the types of power analyses that would kind of dictate how large our samples need to be. And because, like many behavior analytic applications, we're seeing such robust outcomes, the projected sample sizes that we're looking at probably aren't as insurmountable as maybe we would have first thought them to be. We've worked with some biostatisticians who have kind of done some of that work for us. And so I think, that will be our next steps, and hopefully doing so would allow us to access publication in other non-behavior analytic outlets. Now, obviously, we're going to have to tell a story in a very different way than some of the ways that we've told it in JAPA. But I will give, kudos to, folks that have worked with us on our papers. So Linda LeBlanc and John Barrero and Matt Normand, because, they also had a keen eye towards making sure the language and ways that we talk about the work, even though it was going to be published in JAPA, would still be accessible and consumable by non-behavior analytic readers. So we hopefully that will be the case to some extent. And then we can, hopefully get into some other publications and outlets.
Yeah, I love that it's in Java, so don't get me wrong. And
we do too.
Yeah.
Right.
John, don't email me.
And I think also along this sort of avenue is we are always talking and planning on attending other professional conferences and organizations.
Oh, yeah. That's an excellent point.
Yeah, that are not behavior analytics. So whether it's a national SIDS, sudden infant death conference, or some sort of medical conference, like we can go there and we can share the work that we're doing and continue to make some inroads with members from other professional communities. So we're on mailing lists and we're talking all the time about who's going to tackle this conference in Florida, or who's going to do this, who's going to do that, so that we can bring that information back to our research team. And further this line of research.
And a quick story about that, I will say that after we began publishing some of our work in JAPA, it did some folks outside of behavior analysis did contact those publications. And one individual, I think she's a social worker by training, but she does some of this work. She's a professor. And she reached out to me and said, you should become a member of and start looking into the conference for a group called the American Association of SIDS Prevention Physicians, AASPP. And it's a fairly, small, tight-knit group. And so, I'm now a member of that group. And then we are looking at, trying to attend those conferences. They have an annual conference every year in Florida, and hopefully starting to make some inroads there for disseminating our work, and hopefully, maybe bringing on some collaborators as well.
Yeah,
that's cool. And I guess one other thing that occurred to me is, part of Derek's answer to my question, he said that having the effect sizes, regardless of where the study's published, will hopefully get it swept into various meta-analyses, and that also brings visibility as well. So long story short, lots of opportunities for dissemination for sure. I could go on asking you guys a million different questions about this. This has been incredibly fascinating, and I'm sure the audience will receive it likewise. I want to give you guys the last word here to share anything else that you that you'd want the audience to know if I haven't thought to ask of it. Certainly also any advice that you might have, whether it's relative to this topic or not. So if there are people in grad school, or if they're newly minted BCBAs or whatever who are listening to this and they're like, this sounds super cool, or if you have any parting words for them, again, on this topic or anything else, I'd like to give you guys the last word to close out our show.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Jess.
All right. Well, first, if you're a student, make sure you come to ABAI here at Denver, because we're presenting 2 papers on this work. So come and find us on Saturday. We'll be talking about the CM work, the video paper. Come up to us afterwards, chat us up. We would love to talk to you about the work. If it gets you excited, how you could participate. So shout out to ABAI this May in Denver. Come and see us.
And I have a broader final thought, but I think you'll see the connection to this topic is Skinner, in one of my favorite papers of his, a case history and scientific method, he said, probably a fairly common quote is, when you run into something interesting, drop everything else and study it. Surely most of us don't really have that luxury to drop everything. So I might modify that to allocate some time to pursue those topics that excite your inner nerd. And I think kind of that's how we started down this road. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to drop everything else, but, it's at least produced a kind of fruitful avenue of research, and hopefully something that's making an actual impact with the individuals and communities that we're working with.
Yeah, I mean, I'll leave it there. A Skinner quote, I can't really beat that. We're passionate about this work. We have a lot of avenues yet to explore. We all are fortunate. We feel fortunate to have built this team that we have. So I always encourage early researchers to find colleagues and develop a research team, so that you can make all of your research dreams come true.
Well, guys, thanks so much. This has been a really fun conversation, and I look forward to seeing the work that you guys produce going forward.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.